Hey guys, this is Brother Scott with the Potter's House, and just for a little bit today, I want us to look at some scriptures together. What we're going to look at, probably many of you may already know, may already be aware of, but it doesn't hurt to go back from time to time and to refresh ourselves, and might even pick up something that we weren't aware of the first time we went through this, and uh, maybe even gain something that we can use to share this truth with those that we're trying to witness to, those we're trying to reach, and maybe even a tool to use when discussing these things with those that might find fault or be judgmental in what we're doing and how we walk out this truth that Yahweh has brought us into. And I want to begin in Acts 11 and just pick up pretty much right in the middle of Acts 11, which we don't do that very often, but uh, we understand what's happening in Acts 11 and verse 18. It says, and when they heard these things, they held their peace and glorified Elohim, saying, then hath Elohim also to the Gentiles granted repentance unto life. So let's stop right there for a minute and go and look at what they're talking about. Well, in Acts 10, we are made aware of who they are talking about. And that is Cornelius and his household. This is where, or to whom Yahweh had opened the door to the Gentiles through. And if we go to Acts 10 and 22, it says, and they said, Cornelius the centurion, a just man, and one that feareth Elohim. A just man and one that feareth Elohim. So this here tells us what Cornelius was doing. These are Jews speaking, and they say he's a just man and one that feareth God. They understood, they made this aware to Peter and those that were there that Cornelius was a God-fearer. So let's look, what is a God-fearer? A God-fearer would have been a Gentile who was doing the things that pleases Yahweh. He would have been keeping Sabbath. He would have been keeping the feast days. He is one of these, like in Isaiah, I believe it's Isaiah 53, it talks about those who attach themselves or join themselves to Yahweh or the God of Israel. This is what Cornelius had done. So he was keeping the Sabbath. He was doing the feast days. He was following the commandments of Yahweh. So this is an important thing to point out when speaking to someone who says that uh, we don't have to do these things. These things aren't necessary. They're not important. They're not for us today. And they say, well, you can then return, well, then the first Gentile that Yahweh poured his spirit out on was a Gentile who was indeed doing these things. It was not a Gentile who was celebrating the pagan days. It was not a Gentile who was living a lawless life. It was a Gentile who had joined himself to Yahweh, had joined himself to the God, to the Elohim of Israel. And God said, I'm going to pour my spirit out on that one, that individual. And so that's what they're talking about, what they're referring to in Acts 11 is that account. Let's go to Acts 11 and verse 19. It says, now they which were scattered abroad upon the persecution that arose about Stephen traveled as far as Phoenicia and Cyprus and Antioch, preaching the word to none but unto Jews. only. And some of them were men of Cyprus and Cyrene, which when they were come to Antioch, they spake unto the Grecians, preaching the Master Yeshua. Now, this Grecians, this is a verse that I have just read over and read over and read over. Never stop to look at this word Grecians. And this word Grecian is an interesting word. It is a word that refers to Hellenist. So you may ask yourself a question if you don't already know. What was a Hellenist? And this is what the dictionary says a Hellenist was. They were Greek-speaking Jews. One who imitates the manners and customs or the worship of the Greeks and uses the Greek tongue. So these were Jews who had taken on the language, the customs, and the religious practices of the Gentiles, the pagans. Excuse me. These were Jews that were not practicing the faith of their fathers. They were trying to disguise themselves. They had simulated into the Gentile world. So let me make this very clear again. They were Jews who were practicing the faith, the customs, the traditions of the Greeks. They were not practicing the faith of their fathers. They were not practicing, I want to say fathers, their ancestors. They were not keeping Sabbath. They were not keeping the feast days. They were keeping the pagan traditions of the culture of the society that they were living in. And they chose, well, they chose to pick up these pagan customs. I could say more, and we may save it for another teaching. But they chose to pick up, I'll just repeat it, they chose to pick up and to practice the customs and the culture and the society in which they were living. But this is who they're speaking to. This is who they're reaching. This is who they're preaching Yeshua Messiah to, the Savior, the Messiah. Verse 21 of chapter 11 says, "And the hand of Yahweh was with them, and a great number believed and turned unto the Master." So here we have these Grecians, these disguised people of Yahweh who chose to practice the faith and the culture and to celebrate the pagan holidays and the worship of the pagans, the culture that they were in. So as they were preached Yeshua, Messiah, they believed and turned unto Yeshua. I do not know. Let me stop here for a minute and check something out real quick. Will not take me long at all to check this. And that's what I thought. So it says in verse 21, and turned, I'm going to make a note here, and turned to unto the Master. This word turn that's used here is the Greek word epistrepho. Epistrepho. So epistrepho, the Hebrew equivalent to epistrepho would be shuv, teshuva. And what that means is that these, to break it down, these Hellenistic Jews, these that were practicing the traditions, the faith, the customs of the culture and society that they were in, when Yeshua Messiah was preached unto them, they turned unto him. So they, teshuva, they returned, they set down the pagan practices that they had picked up. They set them down and they returned unto the true worship of Yahweh, of God. I didn't see that before, but or picked that up before. And it just caught my eye then. But this word turned is important for us to understand what's taking place. But let's go on. Here again, this could be for another teaching verse, and we need to press on. Verse 22, then tidings of these things came into the ears of the assembly which was in Jerusalem, and they sent forth Barnabas, that he should go as far as Antioch, who, when he came and had seen the grace of Elohim, was glad and exhorted them all, that with purpose of heart they should cleave unto Yahweh. And I believe that we're going to, in this chapter 11, stop with this. I want to look at this cleave unto Yahweh. So I want us to understand what this, when it speaks of cleaving to Yahweh, what was Barnabas exonerating or exhorting these people to do? Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 13. In verse 4. It says, and ye shall walk after Yahweh your Elohim, and fear him, and keep his commandments, and obey his voice. And ye shall serve him, and cleave unto him. So cleaving unto Yahweh means you're going to keep his commandments. You're going to obey his voice. You're going to serve him, and you're going to stick as close as possible to him. Now, and this is what Barnabas was saying to these people. Cleaving to Yahweh includes obeying his voice, serving him, and keeping his commandments, and loving him with all of your heart. If we want to look in this account in Deuteronomy in 13, let's go up to verse 1 and then down to verse 4. And we'll see, because here's what mainline Christianity says, is that once you come into salvation, you don't have to do these commandments. They've been replaced. They've been done away with. You don't have to keep these feast days. You don't have to keep the Sabbath. That's for Jewish people. But see, we see here that we have Jews living as Gentiles in Acts 11, doing Gentile things. But when they turned to Yeshua, they put down those Gentile things, those pagan things, and they returned and they picked up those things of Yahweh. First century assemblies were already, congregations were already walking in this new covenant faith, renewed covenant. But let's go back to Deuteronomy chapter 13 real quick and pick up verse 1. It says, if there arise among you a prophet or a dreamer of dreams, and giveth thee a sign or a wonder, and the sign or the wonder come to pass, whereof he spake unto thee, saying, this is what is going to come to pass. This is what this he says. If this prophet that this thing said that something was going to happen, or gave you a sign and it happened, if he then says, let us go after other, in the restoration, somebody says mighty ones. King James may say gods, which thou hast not known, and let us serve them, thou shalt not hearken unto the words of that prophet. or that dreamer of dreams. For Yahweh your Elohim proveth you. He's testing you to know whether ye love Yahweh your Elohim with all of your heart and with all of your soul. That was verse 3. Then he picks up verse 4 and says, you shall walk after Yahweh your Elohim, and fear him, and keep his commandments, and obey his voice, and ye shall serve him, and cleave unto him. So what he's saying here is, if someone tries to draw you away, so they said a sign or a wonder which was going to happen, a miracle, it took place, it came to pass. Now if they say, go, so let's follow some other traditions, let's serve some other gods that you don't know, he says, you don't do that. You cleave yourself to God. You keep hanging in there with Yahweh. And one of the way, and what he gave us to do was to obey his voice and to follow his commandments and to serve him and to love him. That's cleaving unto Yahweh. Let's go to Joshua chapter 22. In verse 5, he's sending the tribes away. In verse 5 it says, but take diligent heed to do the commandments and the law which Moses, the servant of Yahweh, charged you. Here's how he charged them: to love Yahweh your Elohim, to walk in all his ways, all of them, and to keep his commandments, and to cleave unto him, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. Here again we see that this cleaving, this serving Yahweh, this living for Yahweh, entails obeying his commandments. It entails following his instructions. And so this is what Barnabas was exhorting these in Acts 11 to do. He did not say to them, okay, you're saved now, you've walked through this door, you're free to continue to live your life in a Gentile fashion. He did not say that, but he told those people that you have now got to serve. You've now got to cleave unto Yahweh. That's what he instructed them to do. And to cleave unto Yahweh meant that they would pretty much, if you want to bring it forward to us today, here's what he would say: you're going to have to stop practicing holidays that mainline Christianity has picked up as traditions and says that we're doing this in our worship to God. But God does not agree with that type of worship. If you look, Yahweh says in the scriptures that that type of worship that has been picked up from paganism is a stench in his nostrils. Yah calls it an abomination, a stench in his nostrils. Yahweh instructs his people, do not learn the way of the heathen. So, mainline Christianity, because they have inherited lies, they're doing these things out of ignorance, because the majority of the people sitting in pews on Sunday are not studying their scriptures. They're not studying the Bible. They're taking the word of the man that stands behind the podium or the lectern as to what he's saying is absolute 100% truth, because he has to know. He's the pastor. He's the Sunday school teacher. He studied, so if he studied, I don't have to. But we see here, And I think that Acts 11 is a very good example that they put down those pagan customs and traditions. And they began to cleave and to hold unto the true God, Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel. Until next time, shalom.